The Old School is brought to you by Ahart Solutions, which provides school surveys and applied research. More information at ahartsolutions.com. Good morning and welcome to the Old School Podcast, the podcast about the American education system. But we also dabble in a whole bunch of other stuff, including today, as we continue our infrequent but award-winning series on the states. And with me in that endeavor is my good friend, Dr. Stephen Bourgeois. Good morning, sir.
Here, Miller. Good to see you bright and early today on a Saturday. We've been avoiding Saturdays. I don't know why, but
Yeah.
here we are in our regular slot again.
And with us, in my best Roger Bennett impersonation, is the High Priest of History, the Crown Prince of Spokane, and a son of the state of Washington, my very good friend, Dr. Stanton Cole. How are you doing, sir?
I appreciate it. Thank you for the introduction. I'm doing good. Hope you guys have done well this week and had some fun. I'm
More
feeling the
importantly, have
first
you
day. I'm
had a
feeling the first week of school back, so that's
yeah?
catching up to me.
So the
Oh,
hips hurt, the throat's a little sore.
oh,
The feet more than anything else, but the feet, yeah. Oh my goodness.
I didn't. Okay, so you're an active teacher in the field,
Yeah,
in the
yeah,
trenches. Okay, I have a new respect and awe. The
yeah.
longer I'm out, I realize because I guess I was in the classroom in 2012. That's a long time ago now. I was working in the dark side, until about 2019. But the being with kids at that beginning, I know what you mean. It does something to you, and then miraculously you recover and get this incredible energy where you can sustain it, but that first week is insanely difficult.
Is it a little bit like dog years? Like 1 year out of teaching is like 5 years removed, basically. And so you're hell and gone, and I'm getting there. So
I used to visit schools, early because, in my
it
consultant.
doesn't count. It doesn't count as a
No, no,
visitor.
this is the part of the point that right out, I went to schools all the time. I'd visit, walk around wearing a suit and being one of those. And now it's, I mean, every year, maybe two, if so I've found ways to avoid. I think you're absolutely right. Every year you lose your edge.
Not only you lose your edge, but when you talk to teachers, you realize that you're not part of the group anymore. So I say you almost had to kind of remove yourself a little bit.
Yeah, that's sad, but that's okay. We were always on the outside anyway.
Yeah. And so today we're going to be talking about the state of Washington. And as I mentioned, my good friend Stanton Cole is a son of Spokane, Washington. That's on the less pretty side. That's on the leeward side of the state, damn near Idaho. But you still call Washington home, do you not, Stanton?
Yeah. I feel like Washington is part of my youth, even though I really did not live there as long as you might think to really call someplace your home.
Yeah.
Um, but it was probably, I mean, in the sense of getting to that point, I've been there when I was in school, and then I've been there then as an adult going back. So I've been there two different
Mhm.
times, and it was always a place that I always thought of as a place I'd want to be, right? So
And
in
you
that
have your
sense, I guess you
Washington
can call it
Husky.
home.
You have your Washington Husky shirt
Got
on.
got the Husky shirt. I figured it was apropos.
It
But I
is.
would figure as someone from the eastern side of the state, you'd be more a Washington State guy,
Well, and it's not like A&M in Texas here where there's not really a geographical divide. Although I
right?
guess if you're a Texas Tech, most of the Texas Tech fans are out west, but there does seem to be kind of a regional divide. But I don't know, for some reason, when I first started getting interested in college football, it was Don James going back a long time, and they just
Hmm.
maybe were on TV a little bit more. They uh, got a little more attention maybe, and when I was young, that was probably enough to catch my attention too.
Wow. I remember those teams with Don James, and
Yeah.
as a University of Oregon fan, that was the rivalry, for
Yeah, that one's one of the big ones,
yeah, it
in
was.
addition to the Apple Cup.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So do you have maybe we share this, I mean, if you go to high school there and you grow up, it is home, you and then you move away And, I think the 2 of us are maybe the only 2 who have left the Pacific Northwest to move to Texas. A lot of people may go the other direction, you know but do you feel like you're constantly thinking about, wouldn't it be great to go back, there?
Uh, yeah, definitely. In fact, my parents moved to Texas not mainly for a choice, but for economic reasons, like a lot of people do.
Mhm.
Um, and so being pulled away, I was getting ready to start high school, being pulled away,
Mhm.
kind of jerked me out of my comfort zone. And then coming to Texas, and I had my friends making fun of me, asking if I was going to ride a horse to school, that kind of stuff. I didn't know what I was getting into. And then I've ended up living here longer,
Yeah.
being in this location longer than any other, but it's still something in my mind that I think of as part of my youth and growing up and so on. So, yeah, it is something that is on my mind whenever it comes up, especially lately with the Spokane fires. I had to go online and see where the fires were located and see if it was close to the places that I had lived, worry about the people there. I don't have as many, friends that I really remember as much just from being there 2 different times.
Mhm.
So, but just thinking about those times from my past and trying to figure out what people might be having to do, especially I think they said 70,000 evacuees, and we're talking about an area that only has about, well, Spokane and Spokane Valley only have about 300,000 people. So that seems like
Pretty good
25%
chunk.
of the people may have to be relocated.
Mm.
That's crazy.
Well, it's one of the kind of the unique, people complain about Texas and they say, well, how can you live in Texas? It's the heat, but then every place has something that can be potentially damaging and devastating and hurtful, to people that live there. And so, and perhaps, that's the cross that Washington has to carry. But did want to touch on to start out with before we get into the history and start talking about the quirks of the state or what have you. And I have two very interesting folks here to comment on this, and that is the idea you were talking about your friends saying, "Are you going to ride a horse to school?" and that sort of thing. I'm always curious about the stereotypes of a particular state, and of course, Steve, you have a good perspective because you come from a rival state, the state next door, and Stanton, you having lived there, of course, you probably are very aware of the jabs that others send towards Washington's way. So let's start out with stereotypes. What is the stereotype of Washington or Washingtonians, if that is indeed the correct eponym for people from Washington?
I would start probably with the kind of an independent streak. I think that probably, applies to Oregon too as well. Typically, people who live in Washington are outdoorsy. I mean, that's one of the stereotypes. Not everybody, but if you live in that region, it's probably because you want to get outdoors, even, no matter what the weather is. You may want to be out during any one of the 4 seasons. You're somebody who enjoys being outside. Politically, it's a little divided. There's not really a stereotype politically. I mean, everybody talks about, um, the liberal nature of Seattle, but the other parts of the state are very conservative, so there's really not one set stereotype there. And I think the one thing that always comes up is the obsessive coffee culture, and I'm not sure that obsessive is quite the right word, but they do have a vibrant coffee culture, I guess you could say that, but, that may be a stereotype that's maybe a little overdrawn, I think, overall.
A percolating culture?
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
How about you, Steve? I mean, growing up, surely there were jabs about Washington, or as it relates to them being different from Oregon.
You're
Did you recall anything like that?
trying to instigate and stir things up here, Herr Miller.
Yes, yes,
Oh,
yes.
everything Stanton said applied to Oregon. Politically, you have Portland and Eugene are liberal, and everything else is
Indeed.
not liberal, for the most part. And you know, I think the hippie culture is a little bit more prominent in the Oregon idea. That's where the Grateful Dead would tour, and then their fans would spend the whole summer there. And so we got used to that as kids and got used to the smells of that as well. There's a feeling of wanting to go to the coast a lot, and everybody in Oregon has to visit the coast a certain amount of times. You just have to see it and feel it and be part of that, and I think that's one of the. I mean, geographically, they're very similar in that you have a a nice, easy drive to water or mountains, wherever you are, and then you have rivers, fishing on, so in a lot of ways they're similar if they didn't have a divide across, the Columbia
Columbia
River,
Rip, yeah.
very very similar culturally.
Yeah. I think both
So
states. Go ahead.
no, what I was just thinking it was that, when I went to the Dakotas, I thought the divide was north and south. But when I got there, a lot of the people in the Dakotas said, no, the real divide is east and west.
Hmm.
And I always kind of see Washington and Oregon that way. Stan, you were saying it's not quite that stark in Washington. Oregon, perhaps, is a little bit more so. But would you say that that's the divide, or is it not really as simple as that?
Uh, for the independent streak, it's not as a stark as a divide. Politically, it is, and it is an
Mm.
east-west type of thing, and I think that's very similar in Oregon. Um, but yeah, there is a big difference, and it's geographic too, and I don't know how much to how much that has an effect on it, but there is a different mindset, I think, on the eastern side than the western side.
Because you have on the eastern side, you have this kind of stark high desert kind of dry climate. It's a little bit rougher. It's a little bit more like West Texas ranches and things of that nature, is my understanding. And Western Washington, not unlike Western Oregon, is much more almost like tropical rainforest kind of a thing, where you have a lot of rain, you have a lot of lush forest, you have the mountains, and then you have that kind of coastal vibe that Steve was talking about.
Yeah, the Channeled Scab, which is that area in eastern Washington, you go back a long time. I forget exactly how many years ago, but many eons ago, and Lake Missoula over flooded, broke its ice bridge, kind of scoured out
Mhm.
that center part, and it did part of that for Oregon too as well. And so it is a landscape that when I drove through it, um, obviously, I didn't know it when I was young that it kinda resembled West Texas in a way. Geographic or geologically, it's very different than West Texas, but it
Mhm.
has that same feel, and
Mhm.
and it's really just the only difference is it's pine trees instead of mesquite trees or whatever, right? I mean, it's the
Yeah.
flora and fauna that might be a little different, but it does give you that sense of that dryness and so on. You don't think of everybody tends to put Seattle and its environment and then just kinda blanket it for the whole state and that's really not the case. And in fact, Spokane gets about the same amount of rainfall as Fort Worth. So, although we've been in a bit of a dry spell for the last decade or so, so we might be a little under in terms of average, but not by much difference.
Here, Miller,
So
did you know that I almost moved to Washington twice?
I do recall you telling me once, although the reasons for it, I think it was for studies, correct?
Well, the more recent one, actually, I can't even remember the timeline, but one I interviewed for a German teaching position in the Tri-Cities in Richmond. It's at Richmond? Is it Richland or Richmond? Richland. Yeah,
Oh, Richland. Yeah, no,
Richland.
it's
Yeah,
Richland. Yeah.
Richland, and right on the Snake River, and um, yeah, and I didn't get the job, obviously. We wouldn't be talking now. But those little things, I was very s I thought I had a good chance, and I didn't get that, but that would have been a relocation, and it coulda stuck, and the same thing with Seattle, studying at, University of Washington for a doctorate in German, and that was a choice I made even though I was accepted there and pretty well ensconced and just made a life decision. So it was pretty close, kind of teetering. And a lot of these things, whenever you move from a place, there's always a story, where you're kind of teetering on something.
Mm. Would you say there's a lot of movement? I mean, both of y'all could probably speak to this. Is there a lot of movement between the two states simply because there are those similarities, there are those kind of connections, them once being part of the same territory? I mean, would you say there's a lot of movement, or do people tend to stay in one or the other?
Boy, that one's a tough one because I don't you were asking earlier if there were jabs, if, anything, and I think both states have people who are very independent minded and they don't really think of Oregon versus Washington, unless you're looking at college football, maybe, right?
It's about it.
But I know of people who, when I tell them I have lived in Washington, they said, "Oh, well, we're thinking about moving to the Northwest," and they don't separate out, "I'm only gonna look at one state or the other," right?
Okay.
Um, I don't know if once people get up there, if they move around quite as much as, like, maybe on the East Coast or something like that, but I don't see there being any kind of reservations why some people would say, "No, I'm really just, gonna stay in Washington, or I'm just gonna stay in Oregon." I know when we travel for vacations and stuff like that, then everything's fair game, right?
Mhm.
So
Yeah, and a lot of people, apply for jobs in Portland and Seattle, and I know a lot of people who have worked in both places. They're sort of parallel, almost mirror images. I know Seattle's bigger and on the well, but looking at the job market, it's not a outlandish for somebody to say, "I'm working in Portland now, I'm gonna take a position up in Seattle," and that happens a lot.
Mhm. Well, with that, what I thought we'd do is it's going to go through a little bit, just a little bit of the history of the region, and then start talking about some of the quirks and character of the state of Washington. I think one of the things that people, when they think about Washington and that region, including Oregon, previous to the Europeans, a lot of it has to do with Native American tribes, the Chinook, which I don't know if it's Chinook or Chinook because there is a Chinook salmon, there's a Chinook helicopter, there's a Chinook dog. There's like all these different derivatives of this particular Native American tribe. Have you ever heard that term before?
Well, we hear about Chinook salmon all the
yeah.
time,
Yeah.
you know, um, but I
Well, most of those are, have been adjusted for the English language, though, so who knows exactly
Yeah.
how they would be pronounced,
the
Mhm.
in the native tongue and so on, but, uh, obviously, that that's something that you hear about also in terms of weather too as well.
so before I get into trouble, what is your area of expertise? What do you teach, Stanton?
I've kind of done a little bit of everything. So mainly the big 3 that I've taught is AP World History, and
Mhm.
then now I'm teaching US History, and then I also have done Human Geography. So those are the 3 big ones, and then I've kinda hit a little bit of everything else.
Okay, so I'm
So
basically talking to Ross twice here.
yeah, yeah. Ross and I have many of the same experiences.
Okay, I won't try to share my historical expertise. I'll get by 2 people. I don't know anything. I'm learning from Ross every time we do these state things. So, and I sometimes nod like I know what he's about to say, but I'm always surprised.
Well, speaking of Native Americans and problematic pronunciations, you have the Nez Perce, which I do not assume that they said it that way. That was a French derivative of whatever their original name was, Nez Perce or Nez Percy but in French it would be Nez Perce. It would be the
And those Pierce,
as you
that's what
would
we
know,
learned in school, in elementary
yeah.
school. Those Pierce, yeah.
And then Spokane, the namesake of the town from which our good friend Stanton originates, and Yakama is perhaps one of the bigger Native American tribes that were in that region.
Yakima.
Is it Yakima?
Yakima. We're gonna make fun of you. Why don't you
Yeah.
try all the rivers, you know? Try saying the Willamette.
I got Willamette down, so it's not
That's not what
it's
it's called. It's called the Willamette.
I was gonna say, well, I always thought it was Willamette,
It
so
is, yeah,
I'm glad you're backing me up on that
oh,
one.
yeah, I know, the rivers are the toughest.
Yeah.
So you are kind of outnumbered now, Ross.
Well, speaking of rivers, no matter how they're said, rivers and waters are going to be the kind of the basis for the settlement. It was, there was a bunch of people that kind of explored up and down the West Coast, but it was not until the late 1700s that people started to explore the region that what is now Washington. George Vancouver. He's the first one that goes into, or the first European rather, that goes into and names the Puget Sound.
Puget Sound.
And Puget Sound, that's what I said, I misspoke, so, um, and so you have the Puget Sound, and then you have most, when the Lewis and Clark expedition got in there in like 1806, it was mainly along the Columbia and Snake rivers, and
What? Was that intentional?
yes, a lot of it's been intentional. So, but no, the Columbia and Snake River, the Columbia River is the dividing line from, is it most of Washington and Oregon, not all of it, correct?
It's called the Snake River, by the way. What was your question? I'm having too much trouble.
Well, no, I mean, it's just, but Columbia makes up most of the border between Washington
It does.
and Oregon, does it not?
Yeah. Not all of it, but a lot of it.
Yeah, a lot of it. So,
Yeah.
Um, the first time it comes up from a U.S. history, if you're teaching U.S. history, the first time this might come up is the Treaty of 1818 that establishes kind of like a joint custody of the Oregon Territory, as it was kind of generically referred to, between the United States and Great Britain. But Great Britain had one problem, and that is the Americans were breeding like rabbits, and the British could not keep up. They could not convince people to go out there. And eventually, it will become a kind of a sticking point that will lead to the Oregon Treaty, which establishes the territory as well as the 49th parallel that separates the United States from Canada. The first agreement between settlers and the Native Americans happens at the Walla Walla Council, which you would think Walla Walla, that's probably it's a name that's known. I don't know how well it's known nationwide, or is it? Do I know it just because I'm a history teacher? How much did y'all know? Did you study the Walla Walla Council? You were there during school. I mean, how much is Native American studies a part of the curriculum for a high schooler in Washington?
So they do not do a state history like Texas does, obviously.
Mhm.
So you get more of a regional history that usually does include, like you were talking about, native traditions and cultures, but it also then gets into some of that. Although um, going through eighth grade, they probably didn't get into as deep into some of the historical stuff, but we just got kind of a smattering of all of that. And obviously, Lewis and Clark usually get most of the attention just because there's, in Spokane, there's high school is named for it, and you've got the rivers named for them and so on, like the Clark Fork that comes out of Montana and so on. So Lewis and Clark drive most of the attention, and then I think in high school you probably would get some more of that stuff. And I moved down here before getting to high school, so.
Steve, did y'all talk? I mean, did y'all talk about in high school a lot regarding the Native Americans in the Northwest, or is that not something that was talked about then? I mean, sure, it was talked about, but not to any length or.
I don't remember much about high school. I grew up in Oregon, but more in elementary and middle school, and we did a lot of map making, and so
Mm,
I remember drawing the counties and the rivers and all of that, and getting all kinds of extra credit for every map I made, and I love
mm.
making maps for that reason.
It's another map story from Dr. Stephen Bourgeois.
It
Now,
was.
interestingly enough, say again.
Oh, I was just gonna reiterate, it was lucrative. Back
It was
in
lucrative. Yes.
school, you could make a lot of points doing maps.
Okay. Interesting that Oregon would become a state about 30 years before Washington does. And it's perhaps not surprising because the initial settlement in this region was around the Columbia River. And it was to the south of that river that some of the first major settlements kind of grow up. To my knowledge, and y'all correct me if I'm wrong, but southern Washington is not necessarily brimming with people and never has. Correct?
Yeah, it's a farming and ranching region, and so therefore population density is usually gonna stay relatively low. It is the Palouse. So you've got a lot of wheat farms, lentil farms, you've got ranching and stuff going on. So yeah, to build up enough population to get to that threshold, I want to say it was 50,000, something to that effect, where you could then
Mm,
apply for statehood. Probably took Washington a bit longer.
yeah. It's interesting because Southern Washington does feature prominently. It is my first knowledge of the state of Washington. We'll get into that here in just a second. 1923, the state of Washington creates what is largely considered one of the stranger flags of state flags. One, it's just got Washington's head on it, which is kind of strange. Two, it's green. There's no other state flag in the United States whose flag is green. And it's not even like deciduous fir green, but it's kind of more of a kind of an off green. Did you ever have problems with that growing up as a kid?
Instead of off green, I think it might be more of a Kelly green. Let's go with Kelly green,
Okay,
right?
Kelly
Kind
green.
of that
Okay.
that medium green, in the middle. But yeah, it's not a dark green like you might think about. Um, and I'm not sure why the choice was for green. I would assume that having lots of trees, lots of lush environment, even though the eastern side's a little different, might have played into that. But I'm not positive that that had a role in their decision making.
And and I'm not sure why you should be talking about flags coming from Maryland with gold, black, and red, and crosses
It
and
is,
checkers.
it is because our state flag is so iconic and so noteworthy that I do sometimes wonder what happened to, say, to Washington or to Oregon for that matter.
Isn't it?
Y'all put the name of the state right on the flag, in case someone didn't know just by looking at the flag that it was Oregon. You put Oregon on the flag. And so I don't know. Maybe it's because I come from a state that has such a beautiful, remarkable flag that flags do draw my attention.
You get yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, I thought you were gonna say that Maryland's flag was unique because it looked like it might be the flag used to start a car race or
Yes.
something. It's got a little of the little checkerboard design kinda thing going on there. It looks like you might be wave the flag and tell them to, rev their engines and stuff.
So great is the flag, it probably could do that and do it very well. And no doubt the race would probably pick up in viewership if they actually used a flag like that. So
Well, you seem
that's
to
what
be
I'm gonna go with.
here, Miller, you fixate on flags and helmets and uniforms a lot. And,
Yes.
I mean, if you were doing baseball, you would first describe the pinstripes or whatever they have and if they're wearing their home or away and describe in great detail. And you would also comment on the quality of it and if it upsets your sensibility like you do when Oregon plays.
I can see that. I can see that. Now, before you get too deep into baseball, do be advised that my very good friend Stanton Cole is of an equal status of baseball fan as I am. So
Oh, wow.
you are
And
outnumbered
And the
in
reason
another
that
way.
we worry about uniforms and stuff is unfortunately we are of an older generation where we used to listen to the radio and
Yes.
radio announcers would describe, even though it was for the home announcer for the home team, what the uniforms look like, just right along with the weather right at the beginning of the game. And so that's one of those things that's just kind of built into our psyche. It's just been, spoken to us by our announcers, and we've
Mhm.
always kind of internalized that as part of being a fan, is knowing the the helmets and the designs and the uniforms and stuff. So
Wow, you are 2
And
peas in a pod. I know Ross
it,
does say I'm going to a baseball game with Stanton quite often, and so, and those announcers, I can only make small points today because I don't wanna get into the history, but, why do radio announcers say they're moving left to right, in a football
so
game?
you can visualize the action because
Not in a
part of say again.
you're listening. I mean, what does it matter?
But to part of listening to anything is about visualizing,
Right.
whether you're telling a great story about history or whether you're calling a football game, it helps to know which direction the action is going, at least from the mind's eye of the announcer, and that helps put you in that same place, and it allows you to help visualize the game that's
Like
happening before you.
like the most coherent thing you've said in a very long time. I give you a touche.
And talk about
Well
and
done.
talk about the announcers. The Texas Rangers are lucky. Eric Nadel, who is the radio announcer for the Rangers, he does this too with the uniforms.
No,
And I
yeah.
think that's one of the reasons why I like him so much is because he does do that nod to the old style of baseball calls where he says, white pants with green pipings down the leg. And, just kind of paints the picture, as it were.
So where did you leave us in the state of Washington here, Miller?
Well, so that's a very brief kind of look at how Washington developed into a state. But what's interesting, and it's something that we talked about in a separate episode not too long ago, and I'm interested to get Stanton's take on this. My first understanding of Washington as a state, as a place,
Mm.
was in May 18th, 1980. And that is when Mount St. Helens erupted. Now, if we had been more thorough in our planning, we would have had Stanton on for the volcano episode. But Stan, what is your recollection of that day?
Well, I was kinda shocked too because I hadn't thought about it because I listened to that episode and Steven got through without getting much of the ash because it when it exploded, it kind of sent everything eastward, so he
Mhm.
got lucky and kinda
Right.
missed a lot of that. For me, it was shocking, like, it was completely shocking. We were in school because obviously there you go and you're in school until, like, maybe the 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th of June, right?
Can
So
I
it's
interrupt?
May
Can I
18th.
interrupt you for? Can I
Yeah.
interrupt you for just a second? Can you explain for the listeners where you are at this time in relation to the volcano?
So, Mount St. Helens is closer to Seattle, but a little farther south. So, you're kinda talking about the Cascades, but not the northern Cascades where you have the national park. And then Spokane is pretty much eastward, although not exactly on the same latitudinal line, but it's eastward. And the
Okay.
mountain, when it exploded, obviously did not come up straight off of the top, but it blew the side off. And so most of the ash went
Mhm.
eastward. And so about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, so it explodes in the morning and it's about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and the ash cloud is coming and it looks like dusk. And then when the ash cloud completely goes over, it's like nighttime at like 3:30 in the afternoon.
Wow.
And it's not that nighttime like a true nighttime because you can still sense light, but it is that weird kind of twilight kind of seeming, thing. But it was just I seem to remember, and I don't remember quite completely if maybe this is something I've developed over time, but like dogs reacting to it and barking and
Mhm.
acting differently and stuff like
Yeah.
that, just because it was so almost unnatural, right?
Did you know it was coming?
Yes.
And you were pretty young at the time. So did
Yeah.
your teachers tell you about it was coming, or
Um, so I'm trying to remember. We obviously, we were, so I'm trying to remember if we were in school that day. Well, I'm trying to remember what day it was. I need to go back and think about it. I just know that when it came, I think where was it Sunday?
that sounds right? Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, so it was a weekend, and I don't remember hearing it, although some people say they claim they could hear it, but I would have been young, probably playing outside, but we had gotten news reports that it was happening.
Okay.
Sunday, right?
It was Sunday.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it wasn't like it's something in school, but obviously with the ash coming, they closed everything down. Buses were not gonna be allowed to run. They tried to recommend that people do not drive their cars because if that stuff got into the ventilation in your engine and so on, it would tear it up because it's basically little tiny bits of glass. So we got out of school for 2 weeks, which we, of course, thought was wonderful. But it was kinda scary also as well because people were worried about their lawns, they were worried about their roofs because once
Yeah.
it started to rain afterward, that stuff is so heavy, once it gets condensed with water, people were having to get on the roofs and sweep the ash off the roof so that it wouldn't, like, force the roof to collapse in
Oh.
over time if you get enough rain and stuff to combine with it. And then, of course.
And the 2 weeks off, you weren't exactly, like, running around the neighborhood. I
Nope.
mean, you're pretty much quarantined in the house, were
It
you not?
was it was a lot like kind of like being in during COVID, you were just kinda stuck inside. We wore the masks.
Mhm.
We didn't have the KN95s or whatever, but you wore the paper masks and so on, so you wouldn't breathe the stuff in, and you were recommended to stay in as much as possible, and unfortunately, we lived out, in a small subdivision that was not that didn't have its own, grocery store or anything like that, but my parents typically kept a lot of food. That's kind of just their style. Keep a lot of food in the house, so we just kind of lived off of what we had for a while, and a lot of people didn't go anywhere. Of course, if they're not going anywhere, they don't need gas and those kinds of things. But yeah, it pretty much put everything down for 2 weeks. And then they told us we had to go back to school, but we only had 1 week left, so I was trying to remember the other day if we even had to do, like, finals or anything. I
Just
think
go
we
ahead and write
kinda went
write
back
the
to
year,
school and turned our textbooks in,
just
so
kinda write off the rest of the school year.
almost, because it came so close at the end.
Right. Well, that's a pretty amazing story because I don't think we've ever talked about it personally, and I don't think I've ever spoken to anybody who had such a direct, um, kinda direct experience with that, and it was such an indelible moment in my life because it was a couple days after my birthday, a couple days after your birthday, and, it was one of those things where, it just it no pun intended, it burned in in your mind, as far as what happened, why it happened, how it happened, the stories that are associated with it that we talked about at nauseum in that last episode.
It's definitely one of those things that you do, especially as a young person, so, 1980, I'm 11, or yeah,
Mhm.
just turned 11, and so it's that sense of that nature is a lot more powerful than you give it credit for kinda thing, and even
Yeah.
as a young person, I kind of began to kinda sense that a little bit,
Mhm.
and just, it was amazing for me that everything that you kinda take for granted could just kinda come to a stop all of a sudden without much warning, so it was shocking in that sense too as well, and, for my dad, who was a core driller, that slowed down some of the work that they had. Now he was working in Montana a lot, and so, um, the middle of the summer there, that's when they're at their they're usually working they're drilling for stuff like silver and aluminum and molybdenum, stuff like that, and that's their time to be out, but being in Washington after a couple weeks, they were able to get people back to work, but that was
Right.
because he was driving out of the state. I don't know if they were doing a lot of drilling in Washington during that time for fear of maybe something else happening too as well,
Mhm.
and having people up on a mountain drilling, and then something happened where they couldn't get back down or something. So,
So since my memory clearly was fuzzy from that event, um, I had a memory of, when I was in college, just a few months later, and were there, like, after shocks or whatever where there was um, some white material coming and moving around also? Do you recall that, Stanton?
yeah, but it wasn't obviously the same size,
Right.
but you would hear in the news that it was rumbling. They were, trying to predict if it would, erupt again. Um, but yeah, it would be in the news every couple of weeks, and then for a while, then it was kind of once every month, and then it kinda just started to slow down after that.
Okay.
And you get little plumes and stuff like that, but at that point, it was minor, and you weren't gonna have the same kind of wave of changes after that.
Okay. So my memory is probably one of those, little things, but I didn't realize the direction and just how, I mean, from where it's located, it would have gone right where you are.
Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah,
that's
and
one
like
of
I
those
said,
those
if it had gone straight up, the
yeah,
winds probably still would have carried it in the same direction, but it might have affected a larger area than just going eastward.
right.
Yeah.
And that was one of the most dramatic things about it because you saw that film footage of that mountain just kinda sliding away off to the side and just kinda
Yeah.
blowing out sideways. It was one of the things that kinda made it different than, you typically think of something like Pompeii where everything just goes straight up in the air, or any other kind of
Right.
volcanic eruption, but this one was quite unusual in that sense.
Well, and that's why you got you didn't get the lava flow, you didn't get kind of the pyrotechnic display, but you got the very, very hot mud and ash and kind of those gases that come out of the volcano that just literally scoured everything, like Spirit Lake and places like that and on through, where I think you guys talked about the people who refused to leave that area and the other people who were up there taking seismic readings and so on who were not able to get out, that kind of thing, because it was still very, very hot. It just didn't look like
Mhm.
your Hawaii volcano with the bright lava and stuff coming out.
I think we talked about Harry Truman, who
Yeah.
was a guy that had his, own house, and he said, "I'm not leaving this mountain," just kinda that kinda character, and then we also talked about I think his name was David Johnston. He was, a USGS, surveyor, and he was about a mile from the volcano, And as it happened, he had about a nanosecond before, unfortunately, he perished. But, it just speaks to, being in the Pacific Northwest in general and Washington in particular, you do have to be mindful of the natural forces that kind of
Yeah.
that inhabit that area. So when you talk about the state of Washington, what are the unique things that you will bring up? Because every state has its quirks, every state has its peculiarities, every state has its little thing that kind of makes it endearing or maybe makes it aggravating. When you think about the state of Washington, what would you bring up to someone wanting to know the not necessarily the big things, but some of the little things that makes the state special?
I mean, there's for me, usually it's a memory of mine, right?
Okay.
I think the first thing that I would tell people, because a lot of people will ask, and they don't really know, or they assume Seattle is kind of representative of the whole state, is I will tell them, a lot of people say in Texas, you pretty much have access to almost any kind of environment. If you're willing to drive 8 hours in any direction, you have the coast, you have the mountains, you have, you know, the Llano Estacado and stuff like that to the west. You've got trees, you've got, the kind of the eastern, and the hill country and stuff. Washington's very much the same. You have the beaches. I think Steve talked about that earlier. You've got the beaches and people are drawn to that. They are not like the sandy beaches like you think of, like Florida or something like that, but there are beaches. You have the mountains, you've got rainforest, you've got a very dry area, you've got orchard growing region, you've got a farming, kind of a hilly farming region, you've got access, to Canada if you want. You can ski during the winter. I mean, you got all kinds of activities year round. It is kind of the full plate. Whatever you are interested in, you can find it in Washington. It's just not physically as big as other states like that, right? And then it's got its own little quirks, right? So, Seattle and Spokane both having either a World's Fair or an expo kind of drew attention to those areas in the 60s and 70s. And so there are still remnants of that left over that
And
they're
I
very
think I think
prideful
that
about. Go ahead.
Spokane was the smallest city ever to host the
Yes.
World's Fair.
Yep. And it kind of drove some development in the downtown Spokane region. We've got Riverfront Park that was kind of the leftover. You can still see some of that. But you've got independent people who will do whatever they want to do. So also got like resort towns like Leavenworth. If you want a taste of Bavaria, and you guys have your connection to Germany and those parts of Europe, they've got a town that is essentially like a small alpine village from Bavaria that you can go to called Leavenworth. And so you've got the resorts. Lake Chelan is popular for that too as well. You've got the coast, you've got the mountains. You can pretty much do just about anything you want to do. And that's my selling point. That's probably the first thing I throw to people. And then if they start asking questions, then you get into the more specific stuff, like the locations and the quirkiness sometimes of some of the areas.
So comparing to Texas, where you said you have to drive 8 hours to see everything in Washington, you're talking about 2 to 3 hours or even less. I mean, where the change.
Well, from Spokane, if you want to get to the coast,
Yeah,
and not Puget Sound, but the coast,
yeah.
yeah, it's probably 7 or 8 hours. But for the other stuff, no, you're not having to drive 8 hours in every direction.
So I've had a nagging question because whenever we talk about a state, I pull up a map, and that's when I'm looking to the side to situate myself a little bit.
As somebody who teaches human geography, I love the fact that you pulled up a map
Yeah.
to help you with your discussion.
I need it.
Yeah, I like it.
But there's a city that we haven't mentioned, and we know about it in Eugene is they've kind of ruined several of our seasons. It's called Pullman.
Pullman.
Yeah, and why
Yeah.
ever is there a university of that size and up, occasionally really good football teams, but why Pullman of all places? It seems to be pretty isolated out there.
It is isolated. It's kinda like, people talk about Texas Tech here kinda
Mhm.
being isolated out west.
Yeah.
I think that's the other thing that I would say, and that's part of the reason why when I moved back as an adult that I ended up coming back to Texas is because you do have a lot of colleges, and they are spread throughout the state.
Mhm.
Um, and I would assume, and I have to go back and look at each individual college, but I'm sure some of those were from the land grants that came,
Mhm.
that provided money and so on, although they were not in on the first wave of that, obviously, not being a state yet. But they were, Washington State would be more like your agricultural and mechanical, and that's where it's located is in the Palouse, right?
I
Whereas we always think of the University of Washington being more of the tech, that kind of stuff. And so obviously with Boeing in the 50s moving out west and so on. But it was a way of, a lot of times they put colleges where they want people to move to, right? And they try to draw population, they try to increase economic activity so that it draws people there. And that was part of extending out people throughout the state, I would guess. And I'm making a speculation, but I think that's my best guess answer for that.
That's a good one, and they seem to be known for innovative colleges, universities, Puget Sound, Evergreen.
Yeah.
It's a state.
Western Washington, you've got Eastern Washington.
Right.
So in Spokane, you've got Eastern Washington, you got what's called Whitworth, you've got
Mhm.
Wazoo or Pullman,
Yeah.
whatever you want to, however you want to say it. And so they were cranking out teachers with or teachers with their degrees and so on.
Right.
And when I moved up there and tried to get a teaching job, it made it very, very tough because I was up against a bunch of people coming out of college who were also looking for jobs.
Now,
Yeah.
that's why I didn't get that position in Wa
Yes.
yeah, I was
Yes, don't feel bad. I didn't
yeah,
get one either, and that's part of the reason why I came back to Texas,
that's
right?
I couldn't find anything in Eugene, and
Yeah.
I thought it was gonna be a home run going to, you know,
Yep.
that part of Washington, but now I know I was up ag
Yep.
the deck was
They're
stacked,
just the deck is stacked against you. Yeah.
and
You
Now, from
saw a nice
Oregon, they may
you
not have had much of a bias against you, but I don't know. I always kinda wondered in the
oh,
back of my head of being from Texas,
yeah.
possibly,
That's it
they're like,
too, I didn't think about that.
"Texas?"
But I know that in and maybe this is true in Washington, it's such a beautiful place to live that a teacher will work for a relatively low salary, and they'll even work part-time. I mean, they have
Yeah.
you're a point 0.6 or a point 0.4
Yeah.
or whatever, you wanna be enough to get insurance, but
We
they'll
had a lot of people in Spokane who did that,
yeah,
and as I was looking for jobs, I saw a lot of offerings.
yeah,
They're more unionized than Texas, so, um, the unions are able to, negotiate for lots as many jobs as they can, and they're willing to open up jobs, and it's also for a new teacher,
mhm,
a lot of times you have to accept a half-time, part-time,
yeah,
or you have to accept a one-year contract only, and then the school may like you a whole bunch, but may not have enough money to keep you, and then, you just kinda have to find your way around until you find an open spot, and there just weren't a lot of open spots.
I made
So
my
go
bo
ahead.
made my bones doing maternity leaves, I think I had, like, almost
Oh,
like a
yeah.
you can and so that you but you can't get a full-time position unless you put in those smaller times.
Yep.
It's a big deal.
It's the way to get your foot in the door,
Exactly.
so and
now
unfortunately,
one
when I
thing
moved there, they had just changed how teachers were paid,
Yeah.
and so they laid off about 300 teachers.
Wow.
The area of Spokane has about the same population as just Fort Worth by itself, so imagine just Fort Worth ISD in 1 year laying off 300 people,
Yeah.
and then they called them back the next year, so they all got their jobs back, but which meant they weren't really doing a lot of hiring, so,
Yeah.
um that may not have been an issue for you, but again, there were a lot of people out there and suddenly they're in line behind a bunch of people who already had been working in districts who were gonna get the first call coming back.
It was tough to get in and but they had incredibly generous retirement. I do
Yeah,
remember that from my father and
yep.
my friends who are Oregonians compared to Texas. I mean, I'm
Oh
just
my gosh, teachers I even looked at becoming a teacher in Idaho, and the
yeah,
pay there was extremely low
yeah.
because obviously Idaho is they're very conservative, wanna keep their property taxes and the state taxes very, very low. In fact, their gas taxes are much lower also, which means they don't pay their teachers hardly anything. And it's, just 5 or 10 miles to the east, you get to Idaho, and you're making $20,000 a year less.
Wow.
It's a big difference just based on statehood.
Mhm.
is it the same cost of living? Or is it lower in Idaho and that's how they get away with it? Or
Um, well, the cost of living in Spokane is very good, actually. In fact,
okay.
when I first lived there, this is late '70s, early '80s. my parents described it to me, and I got a sense that that was kinda true, that it was a place you could live fairly easily. They've never really had a state income tax.
Mhm.
And it was kind of almost like a retirement community. It was a much older, even though it was a city and an economic hub, it was an older hub, and it just felt like a place that people would retire to because it didn't have all the rain. It did have the snow, but you didn't have the rain. You could live there much cheaper than the West Coast. But Idaho is also, fairly inexpensive, low
Right.
cost of living and so on. When I
So
went
I
back
found
my second time, it seemed like there was an influx of younger people. It looked to me like they were adding wineries, which was bringing in people from other states too as well, and trying to drive kind of a winery business, vineyards and so on. And so it does seem like they've tried to counter that approach, but if you still look at Spokane today, it's one of the lower places, best places for lowest cost of living.
So did you go back to as an adult to teach, or did
Yes.
you did
Well, I moved up there and I tried to get a teaching job and could not that first year.
yeah.
And then so I did subbing and I worked at another job. So I put the 2 jobs together to try to make ends meet and so on. And then the second year was COVID,
Oh.
and the uncertainty around tax money coming in meant they weren't gonna be hiring, there weren't that many jobs.
Yeah.
And I thought if I was out of teaching for more than a couple of years, people might start to wonder why I hadn't gotten back in. So I thought maybe I needed to come back down. So I may have just hit the wrong 2 years to
Well,
try to get a job from out of state.
that sounds like another story over a beer or 2, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, you were saying when people move, there's always a story for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So a couple of facts about the state that I found interesting, and y'all can comment on it to whatever degree you know anything about it. But apparently, and I would never have guessed this, the state dance of Washington. First of all, it's surprising that they have a state dance, but the state dance of Washington is square dancing. Can you explain this, Stanton? Because of all the states, if you asked me which state had the state dance as square dancing, I think I would have spent a long time before coming to the Evergreen State.
I would definitely have thought the Midwest
Mhm.
for a state,
I agree.
right?
Yeah.
I think that would be our stereotype. I don't know why square dancing, but I will tell you that in our PE classes, we had to learn how to square dance.
Wow.
So even as a 6th, 7th, 8th grader, every year in PE, we had a whole, week or 2 maybe, where we did square dancing. And so the only thing I can think of, especially on the eastern side, is it's an agricultural area, but they supported that idea. They said, "Well, if it's gonna be the state dance, then everybody's gonna learn how to do it."
The only biggest non sequitur I can think of is the fact that Maryland state sport is jousting. Between between Maryland state sport and jousting and the Washington state dance being square dancing, I can't think of anything more random.
Is jousting something like Lord Baltimore was interested in or something as he was trying to set up the colony?
I remember a good friend of mine, my first year teaching, and I may have told this story, but he was known for doing the New York Times crossword puzzle
Oh, okay.
during the school day. And so he came down. This was things were a little bit looser in schools than they are now. But he came down one time. It was my first year teaching, and I felt like I had the students eating out of my hand, just lapping up historical information. And the last thing you want is for the spell to be broken. And he comes in, and I look at him. I said, "Yes." He goes, "5-letter word. The state sport of Maryland starts with a J." I said, "It's jousting." He goes, "Jousting? Alright." And then he just walked out of the room, and then, of course, I'm a little bit off my kilter a little bit. The kids who know him, of course, didn't have any problem with what happened, but I felt like he had ruined my mojo, and, all for the purpose of finding out that the state sport of Maryland was jousting. So, square dancing equally befuddling.
Yeah, that one's a rough one.
That's a new story, Ross. I never
I don't think I've ever heard you say that one or tell me that one.
Now, how much apples do you eat? Because Washington, of course, is known for apples, but it also is the number one producer of cherries, pears, and red raspberries as well.
Oh my gosh, cherries are big. Raspberries are big too, but I do, the apples too, and you gotta get them from the farmers markets. You can get them from the store, but they're better when you get them from the farmers markets. And I will throw in just, because Idaho claims it's the, potato state or the spud state or whatever, but Grant what is it? Grant County actually is the county that produces the most potatoes per capita, so we may have something to claim on the potatoes too.
I didn't think we'd get shots across the bow for
I'm
Idaho,
telling
but,
you.
here
I have nothing against Oregon, but Idaho? Mm.
Yeah. Too close.
So, yeah, no, all of that, and when I went back, um just I mean, I know when I was young, we would go out and pick blueberries and things like that, and one year we picked a big old gigantic bucket of blueberries, and we all felt proud of ourselves, and then we were just eating blueberries for
Mm.
everything, right? It was blueberry pancakes, and it was on your
Oh,
cereal, and we were making cobbler and all kinds of stuff. So, yeah, and that's one of those things that people like to go out and do is actually go and pick their own, and then if you don't wanna go pick your own, you go to the farmer's market and you get a wide variety of stuff.
so
Yeah,
we were
it's
ruined,
wonderful.
Stanton, you and I as kids, because any fruit that's local, when I taste a blueberry now, I'm thinking about comparing it to what I had in Oregon and, apples, anything, it's never the same.
Yeah.
And I thought that it's just a taste bud thing, it's a memory thing,
It
but I think there's something more to it if it's grown there and it's not flown from some strange place. But
yeah.
but yeah, those everything you mentioned, and then you would have blackberries, fresh blackberries,
Oh my
just
gosh, yes.
you just right there for you, and
Yep.
it's part of growing up, you know?
Speaking
Yeah, in
of
Spokane, they like to call them
foods
huckleberries, but yeah,
Yeah,
it's the
yeah,
yeah.
huckleberry they make huckleberry shakes, and
Ooh.
they've got huckleberry everything, right?
yeah.
So
Well, speaking of market, the Pike Place Market, one of the oldest farmers markets in the country, it dates back to 1907. Not quite as old as the oldest indoor market in the United States, which is in Baltimore,
I was
Lexington
gonna say it
Market.
has to be in Maryland.
Yeah.
Yeah, 1782, my friend. But the idea of the market is kind of a big thing. But one creature that exists in Washington, in particular in the Puget Sound, is the gooey duck.
Yeah. Oh, and
It looks like
hey, at least you said it right.
Well, yeah. So it looks like an alien. Do you eat those things?
Yeah. People go after those all the time.
What do they taste like?
I have never had one,
Yeah,
to be honest.
I, I
Living on
was
the
hoping
East
you wouldn't say
Side,
chicken.
we didn't, but, I know people who on the West Coast would go and get them themselves and dig them up
See,
out of the sand and stuff and take them home.
What are they?
see,
I'm confused.
It's hard to explain, it's kinda like a it's not quite a clam, it's not quite a mussel,
Okay.
yeah,
it
but
looks
it's
like a
something like that.
slug, like
It's
a
what?
gigantic. It looks like a gigantic slug.
They don't look appetizing, but people say they love them to eat them. But I've never actually had one, to
Do
tell
they
you the truth.
deep fry them or something to
I'm sure I mean, everything can be deep fried.
well, I mean, like, eat them like a raw
I
oyster.
mean, they deep fried Twinkies down here, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, but I think they can also cook them in other ways too. I don't think they have to be fried to be, edible,
Okay, so
so
since I don't know if you listen to our podcast on sandwiches, both of them. We did 2.
I have partaken.
Yeah, I don't remember what we said on Washington, but do you have any preferences?
Oh my gosh, yeah, I don't remember what you said for Washington.
That's I don't either, but what would you recommend from
Oh,
Probably it's
experience?
probably a
well, I
salmon
don't know about a
sandwich.
sandwich.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
You were mentioning the Pike Place Market.
yeah,
Uh, there's a place in Seattle that so this is again, food is connected to memory, which is
mhm,
connected to, how you taste and enjoy things. But my father, when he first went to Alaska the first time, had to stop in Seattle, and he went in like 19, I want to say 57, 58, somewhere in there, maybe 1960, went to Ivar's, which is literally right there on Puget Sound.
uh-huh,
And he just said it was the best, um, freshest duck, freshest seafood.
mhm,
The boats would literally come in right there. The boats are all around you. The food's going, I mean, the fresh, seafood's going right into the restaurant and you're eating it right there.
Wow.
Now, Ivar's has made a chain out of it. I don't know if the chain is as good, but the actual Ivar's where you sit and you smell the salty air and stuff like that, I would recommend going to Ivar's. And so if you're gonna make a sandwich, then it's gotta be, something with like almost like a po' boy, right? They
Right.
wouldn't call it that up there, but something like that with seafood and stuff on there.
Boy,
I think one of the things that I've kind of teased Steve about the seafood up there because it's like it's either alien looking or it's like mutant size, like those damn lobsters that have very little flavor, or crabs rather, that have very little flavor, and so
insult,
there's
by
all
the
this. Was that?
way. You're insulting Dungeness crab, and that's just insane to even think.
It's the kind of crab that if you looked at it, you would think to yourself, this is what a this is what a science fiction writer came up with for a mutant size exposed to nuclear radiation crab. The Dungeness crab is exactly what it would look like.
Not that big. It's not about that. It's about the sweetness, and you need to. If you eat enough of them, you could do it blindfolded. You know where every little piece is.
You
Uh,
could do that with a blue crab, but I mean, I'm not. I mean, those monsters that y'all grow up there in the Northwest. I'm not sure about it.
okay, we were talking about a really reputable restaurant that sells fresh seafood, and you turn it into an insult somehow.
Well, I'm sure they're going to
I'm
be
just
just.
glad you guys didn't mention clam chowder because I'm assuming that that would also be a source of contention
It
between
would be
East
for
Coasters
Ross.
and
Ross
West Coasters.
Ross would complain probably about the little salt in it or something, even though he'll say,
No,
"I'll
now
have it," but I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't actually want to have it.
I can't speak too much on clam chowder because that's more north of us. We're
I
more
guess
of the
that is a
crab
little
and the crab
farther
cakes
north,
and
but
yeah,
Well, but the West Coast clam chowder it's a beautiful thing. You
yeah,
up in Oregon, Washington, when you're on the coast, which we call it the coast, not the beach, but the coast.
yeah,
you
yeah,
It's
because they're really not beaches.
no, it's a different. You walk around and
It's a whole different vibe
yeah, yeah.
so
out of Gulf
Washington
Coast.
is the origin point of two other things that's interesting. One, Father's Day. Apparently, the YMCA in Spokane in 1910 was the first organization to observe a Father's Day, and it spread from there. Were you aware that such an important day on our calendar started in your town of Spokane?
Yeah, because the YMCA is big in Spokane, or at least it was when I
Mm,
was there.
right.
Um, and of course, I wasn't worried so much about the Father's Day part of it. That's where I got to get my swim lessons in. But when you go down to the YMCA, of course, they have all of the, you'll have a placard up saying this is something that the YMCA did in this year and that kind of thing. So, yeah, that was something that eventually I think filtered up into Washington, D.C., but I don't think it kind of became a holiday until what, the 30s?
Yeah.
Is that a
Fathers
Great
are always
Depression
getting
thing or prior to World War II kind of right in there?
fathers are always getting the short end of the stick,
We are always
compared
getting the
to
short end of stuff.
Mother's Day. And the last thing that started in, not the last thing, but the other thing I was going to mention, 1965 on Bainbridge Island, uh, something called pickleball.
Pickleball, yep.
I don't
And
know
I
if you
didn't learn
guys are
about
familiar with
pickleball
it.
until I was down here, but yeah, I've heard that it was invented up there. Now,
Mm.
you always worry about people telling you where something was invented, but I've never heard anybody contest the Bainbridge Island thing, so I'm assuming that's true. But it being a relatively recent phenomenon, we could find out that maybe somebody else was doing something too, but I've never heard anybody contest the Bainbridge Island story.
And lastly, one of the places I've thought about retiring, you can tell me whether this is a good idea or not, Gig Harbor,
What
which
is that?
is Gig
Gig
Harbor
Harbor,
is,
How do you spell
I
it?
think it's in the SeaTac area.
GIG.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think it's in the SeaTac area, and so we went there one time, and it was just I was like, I looked at that place, I was like, I could live here. I could hang it up here, go into the twilight of my life in Gig Harbor.
Feels
Yep.
expensive. Just look.
It's expensive. It is very expensive. The whole Puget Sound coast area, I wouldn't say it's twice as expensive as Spokane, but it's a major jump. And Gig Harbor's there, and everything then on the other side too as well. When you get over like towards the Olympic National Park, it is a wonderful place. I think that I would love to spend time there and retire even if I had the money. But
I'm
it's
probably going to end up in Oregon.
you're gonna pay for the things that you really like about it.
I'm probably gonna end up in Oregon. The parts of, coastal Oregon is, much more affordable, and so
Yeah.
who knows? Who knows? Well, it's been a long time coming. It is
Yeah.
way too late that you finally were able to make an appearance, that we were able to extend the offer, and that you were gracious enough to accept. So my very big thanks to Stanton Cole, the son of Spokane, although technically of Barrow, Alaska, but still,
Yeah.
for our purposes today,
For our purposes today.
we're gonna say the son of Spokane. And we appreciate you. We appreciate all your knowledge, and thank you so much for talking to us about the state of Washington.
I have really enjoyed being here. I appreciate it.
I've enjoyed it because we've met a few times at Ross's house watching football games, but haven't had nearly this amount of time to talk.
Yeah, I don't think we've ever had a chance to really talk in depth about much
Yeah,
other than whatever we were paying attention to or eating or,
exactly.
whatever the current events of the day were.
Well, I'm gonna make a public, announcement that next time the 2 of you are getting tickets to a Rangers game, I'd like to sit next to Stanton, and I'll partake. So I'm
Alright.
volunteering to be right with y'all
There
and
we go.
do the conversation.
I think we can get
Whatever,
that done pretty easily.
Yeah.
yeah, whatever will get you to a baseball
Oh,
game,
no.
because I
Just found the secret sauce, but yeah, we wanna
Yeah.
very good. All right, with that, we shall say adieu. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening, and stay tuned for the next time we get together. Maybe a state, probably not a state, probably something else. Either way, thank you so much, and I shall say adieu, Herr Dr. Bourgeois.
Peter St. Herr Miller, thanks again, Stanton.
Thank you.